Hello everyone, welcome to the Age Group Triathlon podcast. My name is Simon Olney, I'm a professional triathlon coach, and in this week's episode we are rounding off our series on strength and conditioning, where we're going to be looking at exercise selection and how to progress our strength and conditioning workouts. Now we've been through, quite a bit of theory so far, but we've yet to actually go, okay, so which exercises should we be doing? And sort of just as importantly, how are we going to progress those, not only week from week, but also month from month and even year from year. So the first thing I wanted to address really was that when we're looking at all the exercises available to us within strength and conditioning, there is no way that we can hit every single exercise in every single muscle that sort of textbooks and various coaches will tell us that we need to target. It could be that you go to a physiotherapist and you go, oh yes, the reason you're experiencing this pain is because of this obscure muscle here. Or you didn't target it in your strength training. Oh dear. Oh yeah, well, you had it coming in, didn't you? But the fact is, there are so many hundreds of muscles that are involved in triathlon, supporting muscles and the like, that we cannot possibly hit every single muscle. There is no perfect strength plan which hits every single muscle at the exact same sort of ratio that we need it to support our performance. We have various muscles. I mean, if you look at our quads and our hamstrings, for example, we're going to be wanting to hit those most sessions. If you look at muscles such as our trapezius, our traps, they can actually be quite useful for when we're spending prolonged time in the aero position of supporting our body there. But the amount of time that we'd spend doing shrugs to build our traps relative to how much time we spend, say, deadlifting to build up our hamstrings and our glutes, that's going to be really quite sort of different. There's going to be a big variance in the amount of time that we can dedicate there. And when you consider that most triathletes, we don't have the time to sit there in the gym and do a 2-hour routine hitting every single muscle group every session. We do need to chop things, we do need to change things. There is no perfect way to do this. So don't go sort of looking for the perfect plan or the perfect routine, because it doesn't exist. We need to chop and we need to change throughout the season. Absolutely, we need to make sure that we're doing that. But at the end of the day, there is no sort of one routine that you can repeat and repeat and repeat and know that you're going to get all the benefits of it. That just doesn't exist. So it's always an element of compromise. First off, I'm going to start off by looking at the 5 primary movement patterns that I tend to work with. So these are the squat, the hip hinge, the push, the pull, and the lunge. Some people can sort of slightly disagree over what they consider to be part of the big 5. Some people may have a big 6, but for me, I think as triathletes, these are the movement patterns that we really want to be focusing on. And I'm going to start on the squat. Now, explaining the squat, I mean, many of you will be aware of what this is. It's quite difficult to explain these over an audio format, so do have a Google. If you just Google the image squat, you'll be able to see somebody doing one and think, oh yes, that's what it is. But essentially, you're going from a standing position down into a position as if you were sitting on an imaginary chair and coming back up again. And this is a quad dominant movement. So it's primarily our quadriceps that are firing up, but we also get quite a lot of recruitment from our glutes, as well as plenty of sort of other muscles around the body. I mean, especially when we start lifting heavy loads, our core is going to get targeted as well, because this is, a challenging exercise where we generally put a heavy weight on our back, and we will be sort of squatting up and down. And when it comes to exercises that are going to build up your quads and make you stronger, yes, this is the king. It really is. I include squats in some shape or form in most athletes' programs, once every week, once every 2 weeks mainly, it depends on the athlete. Mainly because of the effect they have on the glutes rather than the quads. Because for a lot of athletes, their quads are already really quite good, really quite strong, but it's the glutes that need a little bit of help. So we'll include those. And yeah, it's a very versatile exercise. So it can be, you can start off with just sort of a standard body weight squat. And if that is a bit too challenging for you, You can even start with a wall ball squat, where you stand against a wall, but with a big inflatable ball, one of those gym balls, uh, at your back. So you've got the wall, you've got the ball, and then you've got your back. And then you drop down until you're in the imaginary seating position, and you come back up. That is probably the easiest version of a squat out there. And once you get better with that, then you can do box squats, where you sit down onto the box and then come back up again, and then eventually remove the box. Once you get good enough with these, once you're stable enough, strong enough to be able to knock out, sort of 3 sets of 12 of these, we can start adding some extra weight in. And in this case, we'll start off normally with a goblet squat, so we'll be holding either a dumbbell or some kettlebells in our hands. The dumbbell you would be holding as if it were a goblet you'd be drinking from, so you're sort of holding it sort of on its end, as it were. You'd hold that weight and you drop down and you come back up again, which for some people can actually be easier than doing a body weight squat, because it helps give you a bit more of a centre of gravity. And again, we build these up, start off with a lighter weight, build up the weight. And then once we're good enough with the kettlebell, we might move on to some dumbbells as well, where we'll be holding 2 dumbbells in our hands of equal weight, dropping down, coming back up. And again, increasing these dumbbells, the weight on these dumbbells, until we feel that we're ready for the big leagues. In which case, we'll go and we'll head over to a squat rack and we'll start doing some back squats with a barbell, which start, generally speaking, around about 20 kilos. So this is quite heavy for a lot of people, and if you have somebody who's never done any strength before, who goes into the gym and starts squatting 20 kilos, they may find that their legs the next day really hurt. They've got a lot of tightness there, a lot of pain. And this is kind of, I'm going to come back to this time and time again in this episode, but the way that we build strength, it has to be gradual. Okay? If we go straight in and trying to show off in the gym, go, all right, I'm going to start straight with the bar, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, you are going to find yourself with soreness the next days. Okay? If you are very new to strength training, you could even have soreness for 3 or 4 days if you get too carried away in that first session. So do ease into this, don't rush into it. We have some time. It's just October as I am recording this. We're in no big rush, okay? So take your time and ease into it. And once we have got relatively familiar with our back squat, then we might want to mix things up a little bit with something called a front squat, which is a... Sorry, that was my dog making that noise. Which is where we, instead of putting the barbell on our backs, okay, we hold the barbell and it sort of sits almost sort of on our collarbone with our elbows pointing out in front of us, and we squat down like that, which is a variation, because if you just go to the gym and do back squat after back squat after back squat for days, weeks, months on end, years on end, is going to get a bit boring. So we do mix it up with some different variations as well. And, I could spend all day listing different squat variations, split squats, Bulgarian split squats, hack squats. There are literally thousands of strength exercises out there to choose from. And we will, as we get closer to race day, do a little bit more in the way of like single leg squats, trying to train those single legs that we're relying on for our sort of our swimming, cycling and running. Because all movements that we do in triathlon are using a single leg. So we do need to do some single leg training. And we will include this as we get closer to race day, but when we're long out from events, we should be focusing on those bilateral squats with both legs. Next movement I'm going to cover is the hip hinge. And primarily there are sort of 2 main exercises that I associate the hip hinge with. The good morning and the deadlift. And the deadlift is what I will give to the vast majority of athletes, because the good morning, it does require sort of a squat rack to be able to get the bar up high enough, which means that you might not be able to perform it, and some people find it sort of more sort of uncomfortable, and it's not as satisfying. But the good morning. Actually, let's start with the deadlift. That's an easy way to explain it. So with a deadlift, it starts with a bar on the floor, and you will then reach down to pick the bar up. However, you want to make sure that you are not squatting down or bending down. in the traditional way to pick up this weight. You know how when people say, oh, lift with your knees, not your back, or bend your knees, not your back, when you're lifting up heavy objects? That is to encourage people, broadly speaking, to go down into this squat position to pick up a heavy weight, which is a safe way of doing it. However, if we are looking to sort of deadlift something, if we're looking to use the hip hinge motion to pick something up, which we would generally want to if something's heavier, what we need to do instead of sort of squatting down is we need to send our bum backwards. And this is something that can be quite hard to get your head around. We imagining that our hips, that we're hinging them back, and as we send our bum and our hips back and create that fold, our chest will come down to meet our quads, to meet our thighs. During this, our knees are staying relatively straight. Now, this is quite difficult to explain, so I recommend that before anyone does any deadlifts, that you find a video of somebody performing a deadlift, so you can get an idea of what it is that the motion looks like. So you need to keep your back straight, you need to keep your knees relatively sort of not locked out, but relatively relatively straight, and that movement is coming from sending your hips backwards. So you send your hips backwards, you drop down, you pick up this weight, and you stand back up. And you lower that weight to the floor, and you pick it up again. And this movement, where we are hinging at our hips, recruits our hamstrings rather than our quads. And for a lot of triathletes, the hamstrings are the muscle group that we should really be focusing on developing more than our quads, because our quads get trained an awful lot when we're cycling. Yes, the hamstrings, if you're wearing cleats, will play a very minor role in sort of the upstroke, but realistically, we all know the majority of the power comes on the downstroke as we're pushing that pedal down. If you are a track rider who's sort of sprinting, then you may want a really good pull up as well as that push down. But for triathletes, for road riders, we're all pedaling squares by the end of the event, let's be honest. So don't get too hung up on that. But yeah, we do need to focus a lot on our hamstrings, and it also targets our glutes, the deadlift. So this is a great exercise that I will always try to include in some way, shape or form within an exercise program. However, the deadlift is far from being without risks. You will hear a lot of people tell you about how they really sort of caused themselves pretty serious damage to their back from deadlifting. Generally speaking, this is what I would refer to as people ego lifting. So this is people who they get into deadlifting, not triathletes so much really. We're talking much more in the way of just sort of general sort of bodybuilders, fitness, powerlifters, the like. They start deadlifting and a question comes into their head and it goes, how much can I deadlift? Because of all the exercises in the gym, the deadlift is the one that you can lift the most weight with. And so people lift a lot more than they should be doing. They'll go, okay, let's do like 100 kilos, 110, 120, 150. And they keep pushing and pushing. And they turn up to the gym multiple times a week. And they're deadlifting and they're trying to beat their PB. And then one day they deadlift and something in their back goes ping. And this can, in some cases, it can cause some quite sort of permanent damage. We all know how volatile the lower back is, which is the area that load goes through. And then people go, oh, deadlifts are too dangerous, you shouldn't be doing them. And yes, if you approach them recklessly, deadlifts absolutely can be dangerous. But in the last sort of 10 years I've been prescribing athlete strength and conditioning, not one of my athletes has hurt their back from deadlifting. The reason for that? Well, first off, we don't deadlift to failure. We're not trying to beat our maximum reps at any given point. Secondly, we spend a lot of time focusing on form and familiarity with the movement before we start really loading a bunch of weight onto the bar and going, right, let's go, let's see just how much weight we can lift. We will do that in a max strength block, but the absolute minimum number of reps we'll do is 3. So we're not trying to go for our absolute number one 1 rep max and pushing our body to the absolute limit. Okay, we are being sensible. And with deadlifts, as with every other exercise, we're probably always leaving at least 1 rep in reserve. And I'll come back to this in a bit, but reps in reserve, it generally refers to if you absolutely had to, could you have done another rep of that? And that's what we want as triathletes. We don't want to come close to the point of failure in the gym. We're not strength athletes, we're triathletes. The strength work should be supplementing our swimming, cycling, and our running. And it is, I never ever want any triathlete in the gym to be coming close to their absolute max and risking failing a rep or an exercise. I always want them to stop at least 1 or 2 reps away from the point of absolute failure, because it's simply not worth the risk. Now, if somebody is starting to deadlift, I will first, if I was coaching them in person, get them to simply practice the motion without any weight, so we can check and make sure that they are hinging at the hips and they are performing the movement correctly. Because as soon as we start adding weight, the risk increases. And if you're in a gym and you've got nobody there to, to coach you, then it might even be worth asking a member of staff on the gym floor, hey, can you just check my deadlift form? I'm about to start, and I want to make sure that I'm doing things correctly, or even sort of somebody else in the gym. Most people will be happy to help, but keeping the back straight is the most important thing. And then we'll start with a kettlebell normally. So we'll just be lifting this kettlebell up off the floor and returning it, off the floor and returning it. And we're not looking to build necessarily strength here. We're looking to build familiarity with the movement pattern. We then graduate from the kettlebell onto the dumbbells. And from the dumbbells, we'll then move on to the barbell. Now, because the deadlift is the most efficient way to lift weight, a lot of people can reach that barbell stage of this progress an awful lot quicker than they can in other exercises. And as long as they are lifting it safely, there's no reason they shouldn't feel that they can sort of move on to this. Now, there is an issue with deadlifting with just the bar. So if we're just starting off with a barbell and we want to start deadlifting, is that because the weight gets returned to the floor with each rep. Now, with a goblet deadlift, a dumbbell deadlift, it's not such an issue. It's not a generally done thing. But with a barbell, when you're lifting that heavy weight, with a regular deadlift, you're lifting it up and you're putting it back down on the floor. Lifting it up and putting it back down on the floor. And when you don't have any plates on the bar, then you've got to lower that bar a lot closer to the ground for it to touch, to the point that you might start sort of feeling some discomfort there. So if you're just starting off with the bar, maybe don't bring it down all the way to the floor. But when you feel comfortable, it's worth adding on some plates, and some gyms, they'll have 1.25 kilo plates, then sort of bumper plates that they use for Olympic lifting quite often, or 2.5 kilos, but these plates, and they're full size as opposed to sort of the smaller discs that you get. If you have those in the gym, definitely use those when you get started, just so you're in a more natural start and finish position. The deadlift can be progressed over time. Now, I recommend when you are progressing your deadlifts that you stick to sort of at least the bilateral versions with both your legs on the floor, that you stick to your regular vanilla deadlift and the Romanian deadlift. I don't recommend the stiff leg deadlift. If you do start doing your own research and look into this a little bit further, the issue with the stiff leg deadlift is that it places additional load on your back. So it is supposed to, get a bit more recruitment in your glutes, which you may think, hey, like all athletes need stronger glutes. But because it places a bit more of a load on your lower back, for athletes, I have to say I can't recommend it. Instead, stick to your regular deadlift or your Romanian deadlift. And your Romanian deadlift is very similar, except you don't actually lower the bar all the way to the floor. You drop down until it's, sort of a foot or so off the floor and come back up, which recruits more of your hamstrings. So the stiff leg deadlift recruits more of your glutes, and the Romanian deadlift tends to target your hamstrings. And I really would, advise you to stick to these two and just slowly increase the amount of weight that you can lift. Next movement I want to look at is the pull movement. And this is a movement that is used if we are using our upper body to pull something towards us. And the reason that we tend to do quite a bit of work on this in the gym is for our swimming. And if we want to build strong lats, if we want to build strong triceps, then we need to be focusing on some pull movements. Now, this isn't just pull-ups, okay? Don't worry. I think all athletes should aspire, well, most athletes at least should aspire to be able to do an unassisted bodyweight pull-up. I think that is a great little goal to work towards. But it takes work. It's hard. Anyone who's tried to pull it will be able to tell you that. So how is it that we can develop the pulling motion? Well, the easiest way to do it is a sort of a pull down machine, or lat pull down, I think they're sometimes called, where you sit down at the foot of a cable machine on a chair, and there's a huge handle that's probably about 2.5-3 foot wide. That is above you. You pick that up, sit down, and you are pulling that down, sort of either behind your neck or in front of your neck. Again, it depends on individual muscle groups that people want to hit. I tend to always, if I ever do it, which is rare, do it in front of my neck instead of behind. And you are getting some, you're building up your back muscles by using this motion, which again, a lot of bodybuilders are keen on, getting a nice toned back. And yeah, that's a very basic way to start it. But I would say, at one point you want to move away from that machine and you want to start doing what is sort of a bent over row, where we have ourselves in a bent over position and we have either dumbbells or a barbell that we're holding, and we then bring that up from sort of hanging down at our sort of with our arms fully extended, and then we bring it up to our chest and we drop it down again. Okay, and this is another good exercise that we can do to build up our pulling. And there comes a point where this gets a bit boring after a while, so we do something called inverted rows, which is where we tend to have somebody on a squat rack, and we will place the bar so it's somewhere around thigh height. So it's really quite low, and we lie underneath this bar. We have an overhand grip on the bar, and we pull ourselves up towards it until our chest touches that bar, and we lower ourselves down again. And this is helping us work slightly towards that pull up. But again, it's a more interesting way of doing it. Now, the body weight that you're using is, for some people, this exercise is going to be easier than others. Those who are slightly heavier, they generally tend to have a greater level of strength anyway. However, you may find this variation is a little bit, it is quite difficult. You need to spend quite a lot of time building up to this before you can even sort of get one rep of this in a good quality rep sort of out of the way. With strength and conditioning, there is a lot of temptation to cheat movements, to cheat exercises. So you will be, people will pull them, do like using the inverted pull as a example. They will bring themselves up, but their chest will stop short of the bar, and they go, good enough, 1, 2, and they're not really getting the reps that they think they are. They're not getting the benefit, and the only ones that are really cheating are themselves. If your gym has an assisted pull-up machine, then you could incorporate this with your pull training as well, and until you can hopefully build yourself up to the point where you're doing unassisted pull-ups. And these are a fantastic exercise for us to do as triathletes. I think they're underrated. A lot of people who end up with sort of issues in their neck and their upper back when they spend a lot of time on the bike, again, this could probably be improved by spending more time doing pull motions. And it is going to help us in the water as well. It's going to help us push more water back. Next up, we're looking at the push motion, which is where you are pushing something away from you rather than pulling it towards you. And the two most popular exercises here are the push-up and the bench press. And I will always want, again, where possible, to get somebody to be able to knock out, some good quality push-ups before we move on to the bench press. Because I think that the bench press, it can be quite a dangerous exercise because we have this big bar that is over our chest, and if we fumble this, if we make a mistake, we can end up trapped underneath the bar. So it is important that we have a good level of pushing strength before we try this. However, you could use the dumbbell bench press or the alternating dumbbell bench press as an alternative to this, to be able to allow you to to develop this strength outside of push-ups. Now, when it comes to push-ups, this is an exercise that strikes fear into the hearts of a lot of people. Okay, so I'm going to try to break it down to make it a little bit less intimidating. Now, a good way that we can make the push-up less scary is by starting with a push-up from the knees. Okay, so we are, instead of with our body straight on the floor, we are on our knees on the floor. So our toes are touching the floor, our knees are touching the floor, and we're doing this push-up motion with our upper body. And yeah, that's great. However, what we want to move towards is obviously the full push-up in time. An intermediary between that knees push-up, which, to be honest, like a lot of people will find quite achievable, is to do a box push-up. Now, when you go to the gym, find yourself a big plyometric box and use that to do push-ups off of. So you will be at a very raised position. And this should feel quite achievable for most people, hopefully. If it doesn't, then it's a good job that we're doing these exercises, because you really do need to be building your strength here. The push-up motion is important for people, elderly people. When they fall over, they need the strength to pick themselves up off of the floor. So we need to make sure we have this upper body strength. Now, over the weeks, I want you to start lowering that box, using less boxes, using the box on its side, whatever it takes to be able to slowly make it harder and more challenging for you as you get stronger. Now, you don't need to rush into this. If you're not feeling ready, you can just keep with your nice high box push-ups and keep, doing more reps. But we need to challenge ourselves. We need to push ourselves. And I would like all triathletes to be able to do an unassisted push-up. However, the push motion, it's not quite as important to triathletes as the pull motion, because the pull motion is extremely applicable to swimming, and it's also useful with cycling. The push motion, not quite so much. I mean, I'm not saying that it has no application, but the push motion, it tends to target more of our our chest, and that just doesn't get used as much as the back does. Now, where pulling motions tend to use more of our biceps, pushing motions tend to use more of our triceps, and the triceps are used more than the biceps in triathlon and swim in general. I mean, the biceps, they are useful on the bike when we are down in the aero position, okay, and we're using them to stabilize ourselves. But when we're looking at muscles in their totality, I think the triceps, most people would agree, is the more functional choice of the two arm muscles for triathletes. However, the reason that we don't neglect this altogether is because muscles tend to work in pairs. And if we have one muscle group which is very strong, and one muscle group which is very weak and tight, that is going to cause us postural issues. So if somebody has a really strong back but a really weak chest, that is going to mean that they have a very unusual posture. And equally, if somebody has very strong triceps but weak biceps, okay, that is going to affect their ability to extend their arm pain-free. And so what we can't afford to do is we can't afford to spend time working on these pull exercises whilst completely neglecting the push, because that will cause us postural issues either now or further down the line. And the final of the big patterns that I tend to work with is the lunge. And a lot of people will, be familiar with the lunge. You take a step forward, okay? But when we are performing this, especially with weight, we need to make sure that we're getting it really right. So instead of just taking a massive step forward, okay, we're taking a step forward to the point that when we lower our body down, then we have a nice right angle in our right leg. And, well, sort of the leading leg, I should say. And the leg behind us, it should be close to 90 degrees. It may not be perfectly 90 degrees, but we don't want that angle to be sort of much too large behind us. So it is a case of, I mean, it's difficult to see for yourself. You might want to get someone to film you doing it to see that you're doing it right. But we are looking for those nice 90-degree angles to make sure we're hitting the muscles that we want to hit. Additionally, it is important to make sure that our toes are pointing straight forwards and they are in line with our hips. Okay, so we haven't got our legs doing various silly things, and if our sort of knee protrudes over our toes, it's not quite the end of the world like some people would have you believe. However, it's not ideal. It does increase the risk of injury. So I recommend that you focus on just that really nice form with your lunges to make sure that you are sort of hitting the muscles that you need whilst reducing the risk of injury. But the reason that we do this exercise is because it hits our glutes, it hits our hamstrings, it hits our quads, and it hits our calves. I mean, those are just like, when as far as like performance, power generation goes, those are the biggest muscles that we use in triathlon. And it really is, especially for running. And it's a fantastic return for your buck exercise. Now, if we're looking to develop this lunge, then start off with a bodyweight lunge is an easy way to do it. Most people, with a bit of practice, maybe a bit of guidance, will be able to achieve a bodyweight lunge. And then we can start adding some weight. And this can be in the form of dumbbells that somebody could be holding. They could be holding dumbbells above their head in some cases to make it a bit more interesting. They could be holding a medicine ball. They could have a barbell. You know, there are different options that we can do. And as well as just having the standard lunge, we have the lateral lunge, where you step out to the side instead, which is great for strengthening our glute medius, which is a difficult muscle to target. So lateral lunges I will keep in most people's plans at some point. We've also got a reverse lunge. There's quite a bit we can do. We can add in a jump lunge if we want to get really exotic. The issue with strength and conditioning is there's so many exercises to choose from. It can be really overwhelming. But broadly speaking, especially when somebody's starting out, I like to keep it simple. Now, these are a long way from being the only exercise that I give people in the gym. Because as well as these big compound movements that target several muscles at once, we do need to do some exercises which target individual muscle groups. Okay, so if we want to stay injury free as runners, we need strong calves, and to have strong calves, we need to do exercises which focus on the calves themselves. So, I mean, calf raises are the general go-to, but again, there's lots of different variations of the calf raise. If we want to build nice strong shoulders for the swimmer to protect us against injury, then we might find ourselves doing some different sort of overhead movements, some overhead press, front raises maybe. But if we focus just on the deltoids and we don't look after our rotator cuff, then we do run the risk of getting a shoulder injury. So we include some internal and external cable rotations as well in there. So there is quite a lot going on that we need to target with our strength and conditioning to be able to sort of make sure that we're hitting the muscles that we need to. Now let's move on to core training. And this is something that some of you would think, it's taking you long enough, hasn't it, Simon? Haven't really touched on it much in these last 3 episodes. And no, I haven't really. Core training is something that I think, as important as it is within the realm of strength and conditioning for triathlon, it is somewhat overrated. Because a lot of people will go, oh, you know what? I chat to some people and they say, oh, when I go to the gym, I do a leg day and a core day. I think, okay, well, they're clearly not sort of doing anything with their upper body, which is immediately a little bit of a concern. But the fact that they are, spending an entire day on the core, it's a little bit overkill, really. Now, core strength is important, but I fear that a lot of people really focus on core strength because it's simple, they understand what they're doing, and they're a little afraid to do other exercises in there as well. So, whilst I absolutely see the value in core training, and I'm going to talk you through those movements now, what I want to avoid people doing is falling into the trap of spending an hour doing 8 different types of core exercise, because honestly, I don't think that's the best use of our time as a triathlete. There are 3 types of core exercise that we can do. So we have our rotational exercises, we have our anti-rotational exercises, and we have our bracing exercises. Now, the rotational exercises, you may well have come across the Russian twist. Now, this is an exercise that we might use in the gym if you want to develop our body's ability to rotate at the core. It's an exercise that can be butchered by people, including my younger self, sort of focusing much more on their back rather than using the core itself. And it is an exercise that I include in moderation, but as triathletes, we don't spend an awful lot of time rotating our core. Okay, so I don't think it's necessarily the most efficient exercise for us. However, the bracing exercises are an awful lot more relevant to us as triathletes. So this will be sort of, I use the example of your standard plank. Okay, so your standard plank, a lot of you will be familiar with. You lie on the floor with your toes and your forearms touching the ground, and you are in that nice flat position, and you're maintaining yourself there, holding that position. And this feels really easy for the first sort of 5-10 seconds, and it starts to get harder and harder and harder. And by building up the strength in our rectus abdominis, which is the core muscles that people refer to, well, as their abs, where they might get a 6-pack, the ones running down the front of us, torso. By building strength here, that helps ensure that when we're swimming, that we're in a nice hydrodynamic, stretched out, flat position. It means that when we are cycling, that we can hold that position, over the handlebars, especially if we are in a time trial position. We can hold that position for longer without issue. And it means that when we're running, it means that we stand up tall as we run rather than slopping about. Now, this is fantastic. Okay, and I really do think there is a massive benefit to doing these exercises, which is why I include sort of nearly every week I will include some kind of bracing core exercise with people. But that doesn't mean that doesn't stop some people getting a bit carried away and saying, oh, you know what, I'm going to try and get a 3-minute plank, a 5-minute plank, And I'm not sure realistically how useful this is for triathletes. I think you might be better off looking at some different exercises, mixing them up, sort of the bird dog, maybe farmer carry. There are all sorts of different core exercises that we can include that aren't just your bog standard plank. And if you are doing just sort of a standard plank and you get to the point you're comfortable, then have a go lifting a leg off the floor and lifting an arm off the floor. And then if you get really good, try lifting like sort of your left leg and your right arm, or the other way around off the floor. So you've only got 2 contact points. That's a good way to fire up your core. What is neglected, however, within sort of the core training space of triathletes is anti-rotation. And this is essentially you're placing your body into a position where it wants to rotate. Okay, so if you take the side plank, for instance, if you are lying on the floor sideways, so you've got your forearm at 90 degrees to your body, and you are lying, so one foot is, the outside of your foot is flat on the floor, and you're holding this position. Your body wants to sort of probably fall backwards. It wants to flop over. But what you're doing is you're engaging your obliques, which are the muscles that run down the side of your torso. You're engaging those to stop you from doing so. And this is a really important movement for triathletes, especially on the run, because I'm sure you've seen it when you're running behind somebody who is sort of really sort of bent over, they're sort of almost hinging at their hips as they run along. That's because they haven't been doing enough brace training. They haven't got strong enough abs. But you've also seen plenty of triathletes, I'm sure, who as they run along, or runners, their whole body kind of twists from side to side as they run. Okay, and you can really see them twist as they run, and that is due to sort of a limited level of anti-rotational strength. And now a lot of people, they'll do the side plank and they go, oh, it's too difficult, I prefer doing the normal planks, so they do the normal planks, but this isn't really solving the problem. So we do need to ensure that we are including a good chunk of this anti-rotational work in our training, as well as the bracing training in itself. So, already 40 minutes in, I am eating up a lot of time with these strength training episodes. I'm going to move on, and I'm going to take a look at how it is that you progress your strength training on a week-to-week basis, as well as how we periodise it over the year. Lots of triathletes will know that they need to do strength training, and they will either, whether it's body weight or they go to the gym, they go and they find some exercises that they found on a program, or they might have read top 5 strength exercises for triathletes online, something like that, and they go, right, okay, I'm going to do these exercises, and they go there, they take the selfie, post on Instagram. Doing strength work, it's really important for triathlon performance. But the mistake that they make is that they are not progressing their strength training. They're not actually seeing it as a chance for them to to push themselves in the gym. They'd rather sort of sit there and do the same exercises with the same weights and the same reps over and over again. Now, this is in contrast to sort of the other end of the problem, which is people who jump in and they go too hard too soon. And if your body's not used to strength training and you're going really hard, really quickly, you are going to suffer. You're going to end up with a huge amount of soreness in the days following, and we can do without that. So how do we get the balance right? Well, to start with, a lot of people think if they start out strength training that they will start off with bodyweight exercises. And yeah, this can be a good way to do it. If you do a bodyweight squat, bodyweight good morning, bodyweight lunge, these are all exercises that are quite achievable for most people. However, if you then want to do any exercises that use the pull motion, those are really difficult to do with body weights. You can only really do the inverted row, and that is a very difficult exercise for most people. Or you could look at, if you look at the push motion, well, you can do push-ups, you can do knee push-ups. Again, it gets a bit tricky. So body weight isn't always the easiest way to do it, but it is a good, strong position to start if you don't really want to get a gym membership or invest in anything, at the moment. So I really would recommend that you definitely sort of start with body weight, but you may want to exclude certain exercises, sort of those push and those pull exercises, at least for some time until you build your strength up. And with bodyweight exercises, you can really get quite a lot done. But there will come a point where you go, okay, right, I'm going to do my bodyweight lunges, and that's 30 reps on each side. This is just boring. It's uninspiring. You're not really getting the right stimulus as a result. So once somebody develops a level of appreciation, then you would look to get some home workout kit, and I cover some of that in the previous episode where I'm talking about equipment. Get some dumbbells, get some kettlebells, maybe some resistance bands, and you can then sort of start adding these, and you can sort of start progressing that workout further. But there will come a point, again, if you are serious about your performance, if you're serious about your strength and conditioning, where you go, look, I'm just going to need access to a gym if I want to actually be able to get a sort of achieve what it is that I want to achieve. If you are already an excellent athlete and you find that even doing sort of 150 bodyweight squats does absolutely nothing for you, then yeah, we're going to need to go to the gym. We're going to need to get a barbell on our shoulders. So if, for the sake of argument, somebody has progressed their way through some bodyweight training and achieve what they can at home, and they then want to go to the gym, how is it that we can keep progressing our exercises? Well, let's take the squat as an example. Now, if somebody, when we're building up to sort of get familiar with an exercise, we'll generally have sort of a lighter weight and lots of reps. So let's say a back squat, we're doing 3 sets of 12. And somebody's just starting out with their back squats, and so they're just using the bar. And one week, they hit 3 sets of 12 with the bar and they feel okay afterwards, like tired. It wasn't easy, but they managed it. Next time they come in, I want them to stick some weights on that bar. So it could be they stick a pair of 1.25 kilo plates on there. It could be they go for a pair of 2.5s. But we are increasing the stimulus with that exercise. And then when they come back the next week, try to stick some more weight on. The week after that, maybe try to stick some more on. Now, as you get into strength training for the first few months, then this is going to be really easy. You will simply, almost every week that you visit, you'll be able to put another 2.5 kilos on the bar and you'll be able to knock some reps out. And that may be the same for every exercise. And this is really great. This is really motivating because you can visibly see and feel yourself getting stronger. And this is exactly what I want to see. But there will come a point where, if we just added on 2.5 kilos every single week indefinitely, within a few years we might be, hitting world records. Okay, there will come a point where you're no longer progressing, and you may relate to this if you're a runner who started off running their 5Ks in 40 minutes and they've got down to about 25 minutes and they're struggling to get it any lower than that. You reach this point where you go, I just can't break through this plateau. Now, firstly, going back to what I said earlier about reps in reserve. So this is how many reps you could perform after you finished your set if you absolutely had to. And for most athletes, I only really want them to be able to perform 1, maybe 2 reps after they finish their set. And just because we are lifting with sort of lighter weights and we're doing 12 reps doesn't mean it should be easy. Okay. Now, if somebody is very new to strength training, I'd much rather they err on the side of caution and they build themselves up slowly. But if you're at the point where you've been lifting for a few months and you find that now your body is good enough at adapting to the strength sessions that you don't need to take time off for running for a couple of days after a strength session, and you go, okay, right, I can really lean into this strength training a bit more now. Then this is the time for us to make sure that we are increasing sort of the weights that we're lifting sort of quite gradually. And we want to get to a point where we feel that we could only really knock out at the last rep of the last set. We could only really knock out another rep or 2 at that weight. If you could think, now I could do an entire another set, maybe add a little bit extra weight and do a 4th set. Because we do want to, as long as we know it's not going to be having a major impact on our swimming, cycling and running, we do want to be pushing the limits, okay? We don't just want to be talking about the fact we're doing strength training and how great it is, but without actually really sort of progressing it. We do want to be pushing forwards. And yeah, a lot of people go, oh, right, my coach says I need to use a light weight. And so they'll do sort of some really light lunges, deadlifts, all that, and go, I'm doing strength training, this is really good for my performance. But they're not actually providing their body with enough of a stimulus for it to actually get any stronger. So whilst we shouldn't be rushing this, whilst we shouldn't be going from, working out really lightly and sort of gently to make sure that we're not affecting our swimming, cycling and running, we shouldn't be fast forwarding all the way to pushing ourselves within sort of 2 months. We do need to get to the point where we keep pushing ourselves, we keep progressing, and we find ourselves in that position where we've only got 1 or 2 reps in reserve. And again, if we start to hit a little bit of a plateau, we may go from throwing on an extra 2.5 kilos onto every exercise that we do to only actually really trying to develop 1 exercise per week, because we know that is going to be sort of a bit of a challenge in itself. And again, if we are sort of working on our back squat and we're really struggling to see any progress, why don't we switch to a front squat? Okay? Or why don't we go back and, try a goblet squat with a much heavier dumbbell? Sort of mix up this stimulus a bit to stop it from being too boring, stop it getting too monotonous and you feeling that you're not making any progress. Because just as we want to avoid stagnating with our swimming, cycling and running, we want to avoid stagnating with our strength training as well. Our time training is limited. We want to make sure that we're making the most of it. Now, it could be that you get to a point where you go, I just can't add any more weight, but I need more stimulus from this exercise. So then you can start playing around with tempo. So you can say, okay, well, what I'll do is this lift. If I'm looking at a squat, I'll spend 4 seconds going down, spend a second at the bottom, and then 2 seconds coming up. So you're slowing down the rep, you're spending more time, sort of placing more load on the muscles, they're experiencing more time under tension, and as a result, that is going to increase their development. Okay, so there's all sorts of different sort of tricks we can play around with, using tempo and different bits of equipment. I mean, it's very advanced. I don't recommend anyone here looks into this, but sort of those sort of really top end strength athletes, they can look at including chains that they will have hanging off of their weights, or maybe add a resistance band in to sort of their squats. It's sort of various other exercises to make them more challenging. There's a lot you can do to progress that. I'm not going to make any recommendations here because chances are, if you're listening to this, you're not at that point yet. However, those athletes who I work with and I give them strength coaching on a sort of a one-to-one basis, once they get to a certain level, we'll absolutely start including these kinds of things in our strength training to make sure it's still engaging. Now, I'm going to round off the episode. Again, didn't manage to cover everything that I wanted to, but I'm going to round it off, and we're going to look at how it is that our strength training evolves and changes over the year. Now, when we sort of start out strength training, as I've mentioned, it needs to be light, it needs to be easy, we need to learn these movement patterns. And, we will increase the weight that we're lifting during this, but we will want to, if we have time, we're going to want to include a block of max strength training. Because if I am doing 12 reps of a squat, I'm doing that 3 sets, then yes, I am developing leg strength and glute strength, but how different is that to riding up a really steep hill? Is there much that I'm getting from that I couldn't achieve with hill reps? Well, yes, it's a bit different, but it's not different enough. So what we want to do is, once we are comfortable with these exercises, and only once the athlete feels ready, it's never something that I push somebody into. Instead of doing 12 reps, let's do 6 instead. And we increase the weight. So if somebody is squatting for 12 reps, 50 kilos, and we go, okay, right, we're going to do 6 reps. Okay, let's try 60 kilos on the bar then. Do that for 6 reps. Yeah, that felt pretty good. That felt pretty comfortable. Let me stick another 5 kilos on. 65. Oh, yeah, that was pretty tough. And then next week they might start off on 65 and try 67.5. Do that for a bit and then try and push up to 70 maybe. And it is a case when we're doing this work of feeling things out very gently. Okay, because we can't afford to go, well, I've been squatting, 50 kilos for 12 reps, so half the reps I can double the weight, let's put 100 kilos on the bar. You will hurt yourself if you do that. And again, strength training should be there to supplement our triathlon training. That is its role, okay? It's not to take it over and for it to go bananas. So it's really important that, well, for me at least, that athletes are reducing the risk of injury as much as they can during this phase, but that they are pushing the limits. And we might do some 6 reps for a couple of weeks, then we might try and do 5 reps and add a bit more weight on, down to 4 reps, maybe even 3 reps of these exercises. These are bent over rows, lunges, bench press, these really big movements that we do. Because we're trying to achieve a stimulus that we're not able to hit when we are out on the road or in the pool. And now, I really don't want to discourage anyone from strength training thinking, oh, well, it's not worth it. That kind of thing is really intimidating to me. I'm not going to bother. Because with the strength training that we do, we are going to be moving in planes, targeting muscles that we can't do with our swimming, cycling and running. But if we are passionate about our performance, if we want to race faster as well as reduce injury, we're going to need to include some max strength. Now, whether somebody includes this in the training and how much it is that they include, it's going to depend a huge amount on their circumstances. Now, if somebody comes to me and they've got 6 months until their race, we don't have time to do a max strength block because we have to get ready for a triathlon. And we will include strength work, but it'll probably only be one session a week with a focus mainly on injury reduction, injury prevention as much as we can. However, if somebody has sort of 8-9 months until their event, we have the time to fit in a max strength block. The reason being is that when we're 6 months out from a race, we need to be increasing the distance of our longest run, of our longest ride. Pretty much straight off the bat. Whereas when we are going through a max strength phase of training, that is going to have a real impact on our ability to especially run long distances, but also to cycle as well. Because the priority at this phase of the training is on our strength work. Because it has to be, and we are putting our body through an awful lot. And we cannot afford to include this whilst we're also sort of pushing the limit of our swimming, our cycling and our running. I may also not include the max strength block if an athlete just doesn't feel comfortable doing it. If they've just started strength training, if somebody comes to me and they're an accomplished athlete, we'll normally do about, accomplish in the gym, I should say. We'll probably do like 8 weeks of low weight, high reps, and then we'll move into a max strength block where we're going to be lifting heavy. If somebody is very new to the gym, then we might do 12 weeks instead to just give them more time to acclimatise before we move onto that max strength block. But sometimes we might not move onto it at all. If they don't have the time, if somebody really still feels that they're getting stronger from the work that we're doing, and they're not seeing, they're not confident enough to add in extra weight yet, maybe it's something we'll do next year. Okay, there's no need to do this. Obviously, it's ideal. I do want people to move towards having this nice max strength block, but it's far from being an absolute essential. It's not something I force on anyone if they're not feeling ready. Once we move out of a max strength block, then we move on to more of a sort of strength maintenance and race prep block as we start to, get around about sort of 5 or 6 months out from race day. And this is where we move away slightly from those bilateral movements with both limbs. So instead of doing a squat, we might be doing a Bulgarian split squat. Rather than doing a deadlift, we might start doing single leg Romanian deadlifts. And we go back to lifting lighter. We'll also include some more explosive movements, or some box jumps in there, for instance, some ball slams, these kinds of movements which are actually, when we're looking to sort of generate force and power with our strength that we've developed over that max strength block and turn it into speed, these are really important, really essential to include these in our program to make sure we can unlock all the benefits of that strength and, reinforce those neuromuscular pathways. But if we are sort of quite simply looking at, sort of a newer athlete who is getting closer to race day, then we might not do anything dramatically different if they don't feel ready for it. Again, it comes down to the individual, and that's where my kind of my bespoke strength and conditioning coaching comes in. I'll drop a link down in the show notes for anyone who's interested. But it is, it really is a sort of a process of making sure that an athlete is achieving the most that they can whilst having the minimal impact on their swimming, cycling and running. And this is where I think a lot of strength and conditioning coaches who write programs for triathletes go wrong. I'm not talking about, triathlon coaches who include strength work. I'm talking about people who are strength and conditioning coaches by trade, and they think, oh, there's money in triathlon, I'm going to write some plans for triathletes. Is they don't understand that for most triathletes, strength is only ever going to be supplemental. We might only fit in 1, possibly 2 sessions at the most a week. I mean, sometimes I work with athletes who are quite gym focused, and there's one chap I'm working with at the moment who's done strongman in the past, and he wants to train for a triathlon, but he also wants to maintain his strength. And for him, having 3 strength sessions a week is a priority for him, and I'm writing him those strength sessions. More than it is his performance with the triathlon. As we get into the spring, closer to race day, that might change. But for now, we are doing 3 sessions a week, but it's quite rare these days that I will set somebody 3 strength sessions a week. When we're in the prep phase, then I might give somebody sort of quite often 2 strength sessions a week, because we're not pushing the limits of their aerobic training. We're just ticking things over, laying the foundations, making sure we're ready to go when we hit the base phase. And yeah, we might be in the gym twice a week, and we are going to be sort of getting stronger, building up, hopefully ready for a max strength block with those 2 sessions a week. Then once we get into the max strength block, I'll probably keep that at 2 sessions a week. And then after that, we'll drop down to 1 session a week. Because at that point, when we're getting closer to the race, it's much more important for us to be able to be sort of hitting our good swim, bike, and run sessions, our intervals, our long runs. That is more important than our sort of our strength work at that point. And that concludes my 3-part series on strength and conditioning. Now, I hope you found it useful. As you can tell, it's an absolute monster of a subject. You've listened to me talk about it for sort of 3 hours now. And I still haven't been able to really give you a huge amount of do this, do this, do this instructions. Because, well, it varies a huge amount and there's only so much that I can do via sort of an audio platform. Do have a look down. I'm going to link down in the show notes to the paid and the free version of my Introduction to Strength and Conditioning course. If you found this useful, if you want to start strength training, I highly recommend this. I've put hundreds of hours into developing it. I'm also going to have a link down there to my bespoke strength and conditioning coaching as well, if you want to work with me on a one-to-one basis and build something really around you. Hope you enjoy the rest of your week. I'll see you all next Tuesday morning.